Stand-up comedy is the personification of science.
Thank you. Good night. My name is Harold Bay.
Hello, my name is Dr. Harold Bays, Medical Director and President of the Global Metabolic and Atherosclerosis Research Center located in Louisville, Kentucky. Welcome to this series of YouTube videos entitled The Science of Stand-Up. This particular YouTube video will be examining the science of stand-up as it relates to forgiveness. This particular YouTube video is but one of several YouTube videos examining the integration of the science of stand-up comedy to other sciences. In the past, we've discussed how it is that the science of stand-up integrates with theoretical physics. And then we moved on to how it is the science of stand-up integrates with the literary arts, as well as psychiatry and psychology. This video on forgiveness is one of 3 YouTube videos regarding the social sciences. The first in this installment were racism, and then the second was free speech and cancel culture, which was right before this YouTube video, and now we're going to be talking about forgiveness. So these 3 presentations are with regard to the integration of the science of stand-up with the social sciences. So let's review what was discussed at length in the prior YouTube video regarding cancel culture and boycott. For some simple definitions of what does it mean to say a person is boycotting something? Well, if a person is said to boycott something, then we're referring to individuals who collectively abstain from social and financial transactions with individuals or companies with whom they disagree. What is cancel culture? Cancel culture is a philosophical approach of individuals who ostracize and seek to professionally, economically, and personally harm individuals or companies with whom they disagree, or they do the same thing if a particular individual or company associates with those for which they disagree. And I think we're finding a greater and greater backlash against cancel culture. Now, as I described before, I think sometimes people are being tagged with this label of cancel culture when all they're really trying to do is keep people accountable for egregious acts. And so that's very different, and I think we need to be careful. Having said that, I think it is fair to say that cancellation of speakers and cancellation of comics at universities is troubling. And it's also troubling when there are surveys that are out that rate universities based upon their willingness to engage in free speech, and we've already discussed that. Heading the individuals that are most problematic with cancel culture are those people who have offendophilia. Now, this is my checklist of people who may have offendophilia. So what is offendophilia? Offendo means to offend, okay? Philia means love. So there are certain individuals that gravitate towards being offended. And in the past, we used to call these people busybodies, right? Always in somebody else's business, okay? But it's taken on a whole new term with the advent of social media. So what are the characteristics of someone who has offendophilia? Well, they are often self-absorbed while simultaneously obsessed about criticizing other people. They believe that their failures are due to the success of others, so that it sort of breeds jealousy and such, and anger. They're intolerant of the lives and opinions of others. Folks, if you can't say, well, we're just going to have to agree to disagree. If you can't say that, then you may have offendophilia. Many of these folks have tortuous thought processes, and they just seem to find ways to be offended by things that a lot of people don't. Tend to prioritize symbolism over solutions, have a preference for intimidation versus discussion, Again, we're talking about free speech here, folks. Free speech. They have an insatiable craving for attention. They want people. It's not that they want their argument heard, but it's also that they want everybody to know who's bringing this argument forward. They want everybody to look at them and say, what an amazing person you are for bringing this to our attention. They have this insatiable craving for attention. They believe that empathy and compassion are competitions. We've talked about this before. I'm offended this much, many times on behalf of somebody else who may not be offended. And then another person will say, well, I'm offended this much, so that makes me a better person than you. And then they will say, well, now that I've thought about it, I'm even more offended, so that makes me a better person. Folks, it's not a competition. Not a competition. But it's this last one, this last bullet point that I think really sets apart the offendophilia from just busybodies. And that is the remarkable desire and ability to suppress or cancel or hurt others. If your objective in disagreeing with somebody else is to cancel the other person, to harm them professionally, to harm them economically, to harm them personally, then you may have offendophilia. And having offendophilia and having that sort of mindset is contrary to what was discussed in the last YouTube video on the science of stand-up, which is introduction of the safe age. The safe age is a proposal I have made where we can advance society by year 2030 by adopting an entire new age of humanity, where our focus is on standards and solutions, accountability and accuracy, freedom and forgiveness. That's what this video is all about. To fill in the blanks with regard to the F portion of the safe age. And finally, as we talked about before, safe age would include evidence and empathy. So I know a lot of people, a lot of big business people want to go to Mars or Venus or whatever. Folks, if I had billions of dollars, I think I would want to focus on how it is that we can advance our society and usher in an entire new age. I think you would get far more recognition for that centuries to come than simply being one of the first people to go to Mars. So why is all this important? Well, folks, our country is founded on the Bill of Rights, okay, the First Amendment. The Congress shall make no laws respecting an abolishment of religion or prohibiting freedom of speech. Now, I get it. It has to do with government suppression of speech. That's the First Amendment, and I understand that. But I think philosophically, most of us think that unless you're harming somebody else, physically harming somebody else or economically harming somebody else, to the extent we can, we ought to welcome free speech. Now, having said that, I understand there's restrictions to free speech. I think we all understand that. If you're going to incite actions that would harm others, like fighting words, okay, that's restricted. Or if you make or distribute obscene materials, including child pornography, no, that's not included under free speech. If you violate intellectual property laws, yet again, not free speech. And then if you engage in defamation or fraud or perjury, blackmail, treason, other illegal activities, then no. What's interesting to me is this freedoms that we have with regard to our lives when you compare the United States versus, say, Europe. Now, in Europe, they have something called right to be forgotten. This is also known as the right to erasure. And this rule gives European citizens the power to demand data about them be deleted. So if you have something placed on the internet, that's wrong or defamatory or whatever, you just want removed, at least in Europe, you have a pathway towards getting it removed. In the case of search engines, Europeans have had the right to request links to pages containing sensitive personal information about them be removed since 2014. Since 2014, they've had that right. Members of the public can make a request to have any organization verbally, in writing, and verbally or in writing, and the recipient has 1 month to respond. And what's interesting is that when they passed this law, they limited this right to be forgotten to Europe. So it does not apply to the United States. Now, having said that, if there are things for which you object, you can contact representatives of search engines and request things be removed. And I've certainly done that. But it's not a law. Not a law. So the question is, do people have the right to be forgiven? Okay? If we don't have a right to be forgotten, it seems like we certainly should have the right to be forgiven. And then, particularly with stand-up comedy, do stand-up comics have the right to be forgiven? We hear about stand-up comedies who in the past have engaged in things like blackface. Okay? Now, for disclosure, I've never done blackface. Don't think it's particularly funny. It's not something that ever really would enter my mind, but other people did it because they thought it was provocative and funny. At least in 2021, it is certainly provocative, not thought to be funny. And I think there's comics who've requested that they be forgiven for engaging in that activity. Okay? Which brings me to the essential message of this YouTube video. I am sorry. Can we say that anymore? Is that permissible in society? That if somebody messes up, somebody makes a mistake, that they can simply say, I'm sorry? Is that sufficient anymore? Some of the instances that we encounter in 2021 suggest not so easy. Here are a few premises that I have that I think gives you a background about my point of view. Premise number one, if you repeatedly are compelled to tell people what you are not, then you probably are. Right? So there's some people that they say things and it really does reflect who they are, and what they really mean. Okay, so a lot of times people say things and then later on they regret it, but they only regret it because they got called on it. So I understand that. Self-control is not losing it when someone forgives you for something you did not do. That's happened to me before. Where people say, well, I forgive you. And I'm like, but I didn't do anything wrong. Why are you forgiving me when I didn't do anything? But that puts them, above me in the hierarchy of morality, I guess, is if they can forgive me when I didn't do anything. When reflecting on life, anyone who says, I would not change a thing is either delusional or never had a life. I think we've all heard that person that says, I look back on my life, I did it my way, and I wouldn't change a thing. Who are these people? Who are the people that say they look back on their life and they wouldn't change a thing in their life? Not me. Judging yesterday's opinions and commentary by today's standards is ignorant, arrogant, lazy, and demonstrates a stunning lack of understanding of the potential for evolutionary change. Folks, why should we evolve? Why should we try to change? Why should we try to get better? There's a group of people out there that feel we should be judged by things that we did 10, 20, 30 years ago. Well, if that's your belief, then I suppose you don't believe that people have the opportunity to learn or evolve or any of those things, because you're just going to judge them over things they did in the past. I don't think that's right. I think people ought to be judged based upon who they are today. Now, that doesn't mean maybe there's some need to be accountable for what people did in the past, but people should have an opportunity to respond to that and shouldn't be held 100% to that position if their position has evolved. In most cases, people who make mistakes should have the opportunity to sincerely apologize and atone for their transgressions. And that's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. I think we should replace cancel culture with forgiveness culture. We used to do that. We used to have a priority of forgiveness. If people are genuinely remorseful about what they've done, as long as they apologize and atone for their transgressions, we ought to be open to that. And it shouldn't be, well, I don't care that they apologized. I still want to hurt them. I want to hurt them professionally. I want to hurt them economically. I want to hurt them personally. I just want to hurt somebody. That's not forgiveness. For otherwise kind-hearted individuals, inappropriateness is usually the result of ignorance or a momentary thoughtlessness, not malice. Folks, we all make mistakes. We all say things that, in retrospect, we look back upon and we say, what was I thinking, right? I'm going to give you some examples here of where I did things that may have been offensive, but I didn't know it. I was in the Middle East, and Middle East, I don't know how many of you've been to the Middle East, but there is a wide variety of folks who live in the Middle East. And some women there are very westernized, and some are not. And so I was getting ready to give a presentation, and I reached out my hand to shake the hand of a hijab-clothed Muslim woman. And she kind of pulled her hand back and whatever, and I was like, oh, I guess I shouldn't have done that. And I was informed later on that many women who are Muslim don't touch men. Okay, don't touch strangers. Don't touch stranger men. I mean, I didn't know it. So there's an example where, she was good about it, and I don't think she was terribly offended, because I'm sure I'm not the first person to have done that. But I could see how that might have been offensive, but it was an offense out of ignorance on my part. And I've learned since then, and I'm going to try to do better. Here's an example, another example. Let's go to the third one here. I was at a meeting, and I was sitting down with one of my staff members, and I hadn't talked to her in a while, and I wanted to learn more about her life. And there was this colleague of mine that sat next to me, and I didn't invite him over, and he just wouldn't stop talking. He just kept talking on and on and on about what was going on at his research site and his staff and his studies and his research and all these things. And I couldn't get a word in edgewise and couldn't get away from him. Well, he talked through the entire dinner. And when we got done, my staff member just sort of got up and left. I was like, bye. And I missed out on a real opportunity to better know my staff members. So at a subsequent staff meeting where the entire staff was there, a lunch meeting, I apologized to this employee. I said, before we get the meeting started, I just want to say I apologize. I should have told the person that I have a staff member with me, and I'd wanted to dedicate some time to talk to this person. I hadn't planned on talking to this guy through the entire dinner. It was a mistake on my part, and I apologize for it. And what was interesting is I didn't think I would think it was that big of a deal, really. It was just a big deal to me. But when I got done, all the women there, because they're mostly women, they all clapped. Gave me an ovation. So maybe it was more of a deal than I thought it was. The fact that I had ignored one of the staff members in preference to a colleague. Here's one. This actually wasn't from me, but it's regard to a colleague of mine who I like very much. I mean, I think he's a great guy. And I actually didn't see this happen. I only heard that this happened. So this moderator introduced this Middle Eastern presenter. And this Middle Eastern presenter had a Middle Eastern last name. So when the moderator introduced him, when he got done with the introduction, he said, and don't worry about it, I can tell you from personal experience, he's not a terrorist. Okay. So, I mean, this Middle Eastern speaker, he was pretty good about it, and he just did his presentation, but the meeting planning people were displeased. So my buddy, the next day, had to spend a good part of the morning when he was before he introduced any other speakers, in a formal apology to the people who attended the session. And I would hope I would not have done that, but folks, anybody can make a mistake. Okay, so if people do apologize, what form should the apology take place? Because too many times you hear people say, well, that wasn't a real apology. Okay, well, here's just some guidelines. Here's a guideline. I call it the SRAPI guidelines. That's the acronym, SRAPI. SRAPI is actually a form of communication via speech recognition programming, but the acronym's pretty good. What you do is you start off and you specify. You make sure people are clear about why you're apologizing. So what did you do wrong? Just so people are clear about what you think you did wrong. And then you need to recognize why you believe it was inappropriate. And you need to spell it out. And then you need to accept responsibility. You need to say things like, I accept responsibility and I apologize to those I offended. Probably best to stay away from, I apologize if my words offended anyone, because then that suggests you're not quite sure you were really offensive or not, right? It's unclear. It's a little murky. Okay, if you're going to go through the trouble of apologizing, then own it. Own it. P, be polite and genuine. Say, look, I asked for your forgiveness. I messed up. I think that's okay. And then you want to implement corrective actions. There needs to be some sort of atonement. And you could say what it is you're going to do to try to be better. So in my case, when I tried to shake the hand of this Muslim woman, I did go on the internet and look up culture issues so I could be better prepared next time I go to the Middle East. Another thing to say is, look, not every mistake that you make requires a big formal apology. Sometimes just saying, I'm sorry, or I apologize is enough. If you're not that important and the issue wasn't that important, then again, just simply saying you're sorry, maybe that's a good thing, rather than going through this. Because if you go overboard with an apology for something that people really don't think is that important, it looks like what they call virtue signaling. Like you're making a bigger deal about yourself, where it's all about yourself and not really about what you did wrong. Now, what I would say is apology is the first step in any forgiveness policy. We're going to talk about that. I think every company, every big company, particularly in the entertainment industry and such, needs to have a forgiveness policy. What is your forgiveness policy? I'm talking right now to all you business persons. What is your forgiveness policy? Do you have one? Well, I'm going to give you a structured plan on how you develop a forgiveness policy. And finally, there's some people that will advise you that you need to have a statement of your assessment of the pain that you inflicted. I don't know. That seems a bit much. Again, it sounds like you're more concerned about you than you are the other person. But But not everybody agrees with that. Some people feel it's important that you say, look, I understand when I say these types of words that that's really inflicting a lot of pain upon other people. I don't know. Sometimes that just seems like more virtue signaling than sincerity, but other people disagree, and so I wanted to throw that in there. Finally, the last thing, look, in business, I've had business dealings where people have done me wrong, and ultimately it was proved that these people did me wrong. And they will go through the steps of the apology, and I know they don't mean it. Okay, I know that they're not hitting on that P part of the acronym there, that that politeness or genuineness. I know they're not hitting that at all, because I know they don't mean it. But at the same time, I'm okay with that. I'm fine with that, because they did the dance. They respected me enough to lie to me, right? They respected me enough to say, okay, we're going to apologize. I mean, we're not actually all that sorry, but because we're still kind of mad, but we will apologize because we know that's the respectful thing to do. And I'm fine with that, because I understand that people are not always going to agree. But at least if you've messed up, or if somebody's messed up against me, at least they had the respect to lie to me and had the respect to apologize. Go through the motions. I'm fine with that. So who needs the most forgiveness? Well, I think we need to replace cancel culture with forgiveness culture. And as per the prior videos, I also think we need to replace cancel culture with solutions culture. So by 2030, when we enter into the safe age, I would like to see us move less towards cancel culture and more towards forgiveness culture and solutions culture. Who benefits from the opportunity to be forgiven? Well, everybody does, because we all make mistakes. Well, what's the best approach when somebody is accused of an objectionable offense? Well, the first thing, it seems to me, that you got to make a choice. Are you going to give the person due process, or are you not? And it's remarkable to me how many otherwise intelligent people do not believe people should have due process. I don't understand that argument, but you hear it all the time. Option A, verify the accusation. Apply due process, because in the United States, people are presumed innocent until proven guilty. Now, I know we've all heard that, but how many people really believe that? Acknowledge that the victim of wrongful accusations can be as devastating to an individual as victim of a crime. What about the rights of the wrongfully accused? What about those rights? We don't even think about that anymore. Because what I hear, I can't say that I understand it, but here's what I hear. The reason that verification of an accusation is not required is because due process is not necessary, because an accusation alone is sufficient to establish guilt. Some people just say that, look, here it is. Here, how many times have you heard this? I met with the accuser. I think the accuser is credible. Why would this person lie? And that's all it takes. They met with him. They maybe they have some sort of connection with what this person is accusing, and they say, look, I met with this person. I think the accuser is credible. Why would this person lie? So therefore, the other person's guilty. It doesn't seem to be right to me. Okay. And then finally, you hear a lot of people say, well, okay, look, even if the accusations ultimately are proven false, the benefits to society for highlighting this particular type of accusation exceeds consideration for the wrongfully accused, especially if the person being accused has the wrong political ideology. That the life of an individual, particularly an individual who's on the wrong side of ideology, that their life is expendable if it means highlighting something for which they're passionate about. Well, folks, I don't think that's right at all. Okay? People should be presumed innocent until proven guilty. We used to believe that. Not sure we believe that now. We used to weigh the evidence. And here's Lady Justice. And she's weighing the evidence, but look what's on her eyes there, folks. It's a blindfold. So it seems to me that ideology shouldn't matter. What should matter is, are they guilty or not? And the only way you're going to know that is to weigh the evidence, not just simply meet with somebody and say, well, they seem credible to me, so the person's guilty. Not right. Should individuals be held accountable for making false allegations? I think they should. I think if you make a false allegation against someone, that could be devastating to a person's life. But there are people that don't agree with that. Okay? Okay, so should individuals be held accountable for making false allegations? And there's people going to say no, because this may discourage other people from coming forward in the future. If they're held accountable for false accusations, then other people that come forward with the same accusations may not be so willing to come forward. So the life of the accused is expendable, because you don't want to reduce people coming forward who may have similar accusations. And it's better that 10 innocent persons suffer than let one guilty party go free. We didn't used to think that. I think that's the way a lot of people think now. So what's the argument for people being held accountable if they make false allegations? Well, it adds credibility to those who come forward in the future, because now people know that they're going to be held accountable, that if they're going to make accusations, they better be accurate. It can't just be, again, just a political ploy or some sort of ideological attack or whatever. I mean, there's got to be some merit to the accusation. And then there's this statement from William Blackstone, English judge. You always hear on these, when you talk to law folks or you turn on law shows on the TV, they talk about Blackstone. He's quoted as saying, it's better 10 guilty persons go free than one innocent party suffer. Again, prioritizing the need to protect the rights of the wrongfully accused. Now, I think the pendulum is swung way too much towards the accuser as opposed to the accused. At minimum, I think those who are accused of doing some wrongdoing ought to be entitled to due process. So let's talk about forgiveness guidelines. And I'm appealing to you business leaders. In the chance that there are some business leaders watching this video, there are a lot of advantages to you to have forgiveness policies and post them on your website. Okay? Adopt policies and procedures with regard to forgiveness. That way you don't have to think about it. Something pops up and it's getting a lot of publicity. You can just say, hey, look, we're following our policies and procedures. Following our forgiveness policies and procedures. And then it's off your desk. Plus, if you establish policies and procedures with regard to forgiveness, during times where there's some level-headedness, and maybe you'll be kind to your employees. Your knee-jerk reaction won't be to just simply cancel them. Just cancel them. And remember this. I understand that as business leaders, you've maybe never done anything wrong, but there may be times where you have done something wrong. Maybe you would also like the opportunity for forgiveness. So maybe someday you would also benefit from a culture that is transformed from cancel culture to forgiveness culture. I think most people in the United States are forgiving people. I really do. It's just that they want to see this forgiveness to be equally applied. They want to know that people are remorseful for what they've done, and they would like to know that there's been some sort of atonement for whatever harm that's been created. And I think if you do those things, it'll be a much better world. Okay? And finally, how do we get this done? Well, I think those with a record of canceling may benefit from establishing and adhering to a priori and publicly posted forgiveness guidelines. And this would be things like the entertainment industry and the sports industry and politicians and corporations and such. With a focus on valuing employees, prioritizing forgiveness, respecting free speech, and to the extent possible, just avoid all the politics and the publicity. Folks, this cancel culture in nobody's interest. You're not looking good when you have your CEO or your president on the TV and you're taking a position and it's clear you don't really know what you're talking about. And it's clear you haven't ascertained the facts, or at least waited on the facts. You're just doing something that you think is going to fly over well with the public, and it won't. Okay, it won't, because on the one side, people just think you're pandering, and on the other side, people think you're just virtue signaling. So have a plan, have an a priori plan in place. Because what's the best way to be forgiven? It's to forgive others. If you have a record of forgiving others, then maybe it'll be easy for others to forgive you. Provide that pathway to forgive others. The other thing is, man, there's got to be a limit. There's got to be a statute of limitations on silly things that people have done. I have here 10 years ago. I'll say 10 years. Now, is 10 years the right number of years? I mean, I don't know. I'm just throwing out a figure. Just 10 years. If you said or did something 10 years ago, in most cases, I think that ought to be taken into consideration. Now, it doesn't have to be 10 years. But I think we do need to recognize that individuals and societies change over time. Now, they can either evolve or devolve. I'll leave that to you. But I just think in many instances, it's unreasonable to judge a person's past actions by today's standards. I think that's unfair. Judge people if you're going to judge a person, if you just have to judge a person, judge them by who they are today, not by 10 plus years ago. Let me give you an example. 1977, a Gallup poll found 62% of employees would prefer a man as a boss, and 7% would prefer a woman as a boss, with most women preferring a man boss. Now, admittedly, this is more than 10 years ago, but again, my point is societies evolve. And I will tell you, as a small business person, that was exactly true. 30 years ago, when I first started out, this is exactly true. This was real. This isn't just some fake survey. However, in 2017, another Gallup poll found that 23% of employees would prefer a man, 21% would prefer a woman boss, with 55% having no boss preference based upon sex. Folks, society evolved. And I'll tell you, this is exactly my experience as a small business person. My employees now, I don't think they much care. Well, I know they don't much care. They don't much care if it's a man or a woman, as long as they're keeping the trains running on time and they treat the employees fairly. That's the criteria. Can they be a good boss? It isn't, can they be a good man boss or a good woman boss? It's, can they be a good boss? That, to me, is an example of evolution. And I think it's illustrative of how it is that we can do better. Over time, we can do better. Now, again, why did I pick out 10 years? Look, here's decades ago. We had the Motorola cell phones. I used to have this type of phone. It was a fabulous piece of device. I mean, wow. It would not only make phone calls, but if you ever wanted to nail down a box girder bridge or whatever, I mean, you just use this. I mean, it was sturdy, it was strong, it was bulky, it was everything you want in a phone. Okay, but you don't see too many of these out there anymore, do you? Right? We used to use typewriters, whiteout, slide projectors. Still got my slide projector. Palm Pilots, never had one of those. Vinyl records, cassette tapes, 8-track tapes, VHS tapes, floppy disks, Polaroid cameras. Do people even know what Polaroid cameras are anymore, unless they're listening to a song? Modems. Oh my gosh. Modems. Encyclopedias. How about recommending juice to infants? Don't do that anymore, do we? How about disco? How about nurses' caps? When I first started 30 years ago for another business, I mean, I didn't own it. As part of the policies and procedures for employees, there nurses were required to wear nurses' caps. Can you imagine put that in the policies and procedures today, that nurses are required to wear nurses' caps? We used to recommend estrogen replacement therapy for almost all postmenopausal women because we thought it was going to reduce the risk of heart disease. Turns out it didn't, so we don't recommend that routinely anymore. All I'm saying is society evolves. Folks, society evolves, and holding people accountable for what they did 10 plus years ago, holding them accountable today, I think it's just lazy. Here's some other things. What's gone on just in the past 10 years? You say, well, some of those were decades ago, and okay, I'll give you that. What about just the past 10 years? Workplace pumping. My staff has pre-made hangers on the door that talk about how it is they're pumping. I'm talking about for breastfeeding purposes. Pumping. They have these things that hang on the door, these little signs that hang on the door for workplace pumping. And that's just in the past 10 years. SpaceX, Tesla, self-driving cars, LED light bulbs, Ring doorbell, just past 10 years, folks. Siri, Amazon, Alexa, Oculus, advances in medical science like CRISPR gene editing. I mean, there's been extraordinary advances in the past 10 years. And here's just some very practical examples. YouTube didn't start till 2005, iPad 2010, TikTok 2016. All I'm saying is, in many ways, we're in a very different world than we were 10 years ago. So why would we can't hold the world to the standard of 10 years ago. Why would we hold people to the standard 10 years ago? So let's go back to premise number 4 that I mentioned before. Judging yesterday's opinions and commentary by today's standard is ignorant, arrogant, lazy, and demonstrates a stunning lack of understanding of potential for evolutionary change. Stop it. Stop it, folks. Instead of just dredging up things people have done in the past, why don't we look forward and implement forgiveness? What's the downside of that? What's the downside of replacing cancel culture with forgiveness culture? Now, what I have here is I have a set of classifications and some recommendations as to how we can enter into forgiveness culture. Many times, you've heard over many videos, I've been talking about how people just talk about problems, don't really offer solutions. Here's a solution. Here's an instantaneous solution to replace cancel culture with forgiveness cultures. And again, all you business folks out there, how great would this be? Think how advantageous this would be, not just to your employees, although that should be a consideration, but also to just your business. Do you really have time to keep fighting this losing war time after time after time? Fix it. And it can be easily fixed by adopting forgiveness policies. All right. So first, let's classify objectionable speech or acts within the work setting. So 4 is you're convicted of a heinous crime. Class 3, physical violence or destruction. Class 2, associated with physical violence or destruction. Class 1 might reasonably be interpreted as objectionable. And then class 0, objectionable speech to some people. So now you have these classifications. What do we do about it? Well, we implement the Forgiveness for Verified Acts guidelines, FOVA guidelines. And people say, where did you get the FOVA guidelines? Ultimately, you would like to get a bunch of stakeholder organizations and take this as a template and work it out. But if you don't want to do that and you want to adopt this now, just say, well, who came up with the FOVA guidelines? You can say, well, came from a medical researcher, because I am a medical researcher. I've been an investigator for over 500 clinical trials, been in peer review PubMed searchable journals, over 250 articles, for which I've been a contributing author, former musician, former stand-up comic for 10 years. So I do have some bona fides. So you can just say they're mine if you want, whatever gets it done. And here are the guidelines. Now, we're going to go through each one of these, but here they are in a nutshell. Forgiveness for Verified Acts guidelines. First off, first step, are the Hazel-Scott rules. You got to apply the Hazel-Scott rules. And if you don't remember what those are, go back and look at the racism video, the science of stand-up racism video, where I talked about Hazel-Scott and just the abomination when she was brought up in front of brought up for being a communist sympathizer. Just still burns me up. Burns me up then, burns me up now. Okay? So as a result of her experience, her unfortunate experience in cancellation, I think we ought to, when a person's being accused of doing something objectionable, we ought to apply the Hazel-Scott rules. What are these rules? First, you need to specify in detail the accusations. Okay? What you don't do is you don't get up there and say, well, we support fill in the blank. Therefore, this person's canceled. No, that didn't get it done because you didn't specify what the problem was. You need to, if you feel the evidence there is sufficient to potentially cancel somebody or fire somebody, then you at least ought to tell the person what it is that they did wrong, and you need to specify. And I think by doing that alone, I think you're going to find out a lot of things. Because as I said too many times, I see too many big-time CEOs or presidents of corporations that get on the TV and they never specify what it is that was wrong with what they're upset about. You know, what they're canceling about. It's not right. If you're going to take enough time and to get in front of a camera and complain about something and talk about canceling something because you object to it or your company objects to it, then you ought to take the time to specify in detail what it is you think is wrong. In detail. Okay, not generalities, in detail. All right. Then you need to follow objective procedures to verify the accusations. Is it true? First thing to do, find out if it is true. That would seem to be a minimum that you ought to consider in forgiveness policies. Then you need to consider the time period since the accusation took place. Folks, greater than 10 years ago, I don't know. I think there should be a different standard about something that took place 10 plus years ago versus something that took place yesterday. If the accusations prove to be false, then publicize the exoneration at least to the degree as coverage of the false accusation. If ultimately your employee was falsely accused, well, just like if they're rightfully accused, the employee should atone for what they did. If they're wrongfully accused, you need to atone for what you did to the employee by highlighting these accusations without first getting the facts. Okay? So I think false accusations pretty high on the list of objectionable things that people do. And finally, if a person falsely accuses somebody else, they need to be held accountable. It could be that if you have one employee that accuses another employee of something and it turns out to be false, then just as you might have canceled the employee who supposedly did something, who was accused of doing something, you should consider canceling the person who made the false accusation, because that's pretty serious. All right, so the two basic components of a forgiveness policy, once you establish that an apology or forgiveness is necessary. Again, first thing you need to do is find out if the person actually did what they're accused of doing. That should be the first. Due process. That needs to take place in all cases. Due process is necessary. No matter what the issue is and no matter what the current narrative is, it should be your policy as a company that people should have due process. All right. Once it turns out that this person did do something objectionable, then you need to embark upon procedures with regard to apology and atonement. And remember, when I'm presenting here are guidelines. They're not laws. They're not laws. These are guidelines. These are just things to consider. So none of these should be considered hard and fast laws. So let's talk about a person who engages in a class 4 offense, some sort of heinous crime. They're convicted of being a serial killer or a rapist or a pedophile. They're convicted. I mean, they went to court. Well, then they need to undergo criminal prosecution and probably ought to be fired. Okay, so I don't want to be too harsh here, but I think that would be grounds for termination if they were a serial killer, a rapist, or a pedophile. Okay? All right, class 3 offense. What if they were directly and recently engaged in an act of physical violence and destruction of property? Well, yet again, if they're criminally prosecuted, then I think it's fine if you want to terminate their employment. And it doesn't matter what side they're on politically. If you engage in violence, physical violence, you hurt somebody else, or you destroy property or whatever, it doesn't matter what side of the ideology you're on. I think this person should be considered for job termination. Let's give some practical examples for a class 3 offense. A professional athlete was recorded on videotape beating his wife senseless. Well, the player was forwarded for criminal prosecution and released from the team. During a pro-life protest, an employee bombed an abortion clinic and hurt clinical staff members. Well, the employee was forwarded for criminal prosecution and terminated from employment. While protesting police brutality, an employee physically assaulted a police officer and looted and set fire to small businesses. The employee was forwarded for criminal prosecution and terminated from employment. In a drunken rage, a woman employee was shown on social media shouting vile language and violently trashing her ex-boyfriend's home. Now, there may be extenuating circumstances here, and maybe you as an employer are a very forgiving type of person, and maybe this is out of character for them, and maybe you can take that into consideration. But at least you'll have a consistent policy. And remember, these are guidelines, not laws. In an act of road rage, a man employee drove his car into another car, causing damage to both cars and placing multiple individuals at risk for injury. Nobody's really injured and whatever, but they were still forwarded for criminal prosecution, and I think it's perfectly appropriate that the employee be suspended, and then the company can determine whether or not that the employee should be terminated. But at least you'd have this in your forgiveness policy, so your employees know. They know the rules. I play better when I know the rules. All right, class 2 offense. And these are individuals with proven objectionable offenses. All right. So here's a person who is intimately involved with an identifiable event that resulted in physical violence. So they didn't actually do physical violence, but they were there when it happened. And there was an unambiguous threat of physical violence. So they said something that, yeah, it was a threat of physical violence. Or they openly support a group that unambiguously advocates or engages in physical violence. Or maybe they engaged in blatant false accusations against a non-public person or group, including slander or unlawful defamation. Folks, being wrongfully accused, it's a horrible thing. It can disrupt a person's entire life. Okay? Can be devastating. And so false accusations ought to be taken serious. False accusations against a public person or group, including malicious or intentional slander or unlawful defamation with reckless disregard for the truth. Now, I know it's considered sport. If you have somebody on the political left or right, whichever one you disagree, it's considered sport just to say horrible things about them. But if you accuse a public person or group of doing things, and you do so in a malicious or intentional slander, an unlawful defamation, and you do it with reckless regard for the truth, that's a problem. I don't care if they are a public official. I don't care if they are a celebrity. You're not entitled to do that. That is against the law. And here it may result in criminal prosecution and job termination. You're just going to have to make that call as a business. So here's some examples. During a protest of police brutality, an employee was found to have associated with those involved in the looting and burning of small businesses. So before deciding upon prosecution or termination, the authorities and employer gathered the information to consider the circumstances and the degree the employee was engaged in a violent aspect of the protest. So you got to get the facts. Here you're going to want to get the facts, and you're going to have to come to some sort of conclusion. And then you can make a decision whether you want to terminate the employee or not. But if they were, just simply because they were at a protest where violence took place or looting took place, there may be extenuating circumstances where you might want to look at that first. You might want to get the facts first before you just fire somebody. An employee was found to have associated with a protest of an election that this protest included vandalization, occupation, and a law enforcement shooting death of one of the protesters. Yet again, for consistency, you'd first, before you decide on prosecution or termination, you need to get the facts. You need to get the evidence. And then you can make a rational decision. But at least you will have, these types of things on your website. At least your employees will know where they stand before they engage in these types of activities, and then certainly after they engage in these types of activities. An employee made an egregious accusation against another employee that was proven false. Now, maybe I'm way too far on the other end of this, but I think that's a horrible thing to do. I think it's a horrible thing to do to falsely accuse people of doing something. So regarding the potential for prosecution, the employer deferred the wronged employee regarding legal remedies. So maybe the person who was falsely accused is going to seek legal remedies or whatever, but with regard to employment, I think it's time for the employer to sit down and consider all the facts and determine whether this employee who made the false accusation, whether that employee should be terminated. Not saying they should be terminated. I'm just saying you need to get the facts figured out. All right, what about Class 1? Class 1 objectionable acts or speech. Class 1, speech that might be interpreted as a threat of physical violence. In other words, it's not an actual threat. It's just that some people might interpret it as a threat. Or somebody that just blurts out a racial slur. Okay? Otherwise, good person, they just shout this out and you're like, what was that? Or how about slander or defamation of a public individual done without malice or intent and without reckless disregard for the truth? Maybe they just didn't know better. Maybe this is what they were told. Maybe this is what they heard on the cable news networks or whatever. And they just sort of repeated this and it turns out it wasn't true. So again, just adhere to company policies. Here's some examples. A possible speaker at a college has repeatedly apologized for a radio interview given 10 years before, where he engaged in speech that, while it did not result in any known physical violence against women, was interpreted by some as being dismissive of a physical threat towards women. So the college then needs to make a decision. What is its forgiveness policy? Does it say, look, this person has apologized, has repeatedly done so over 10 years, and this thing happened 10 years ago. It was a mistake. We know it's a mistake. Then make a decision. A TV actor, news person, was recorded using a racial slur. Then I think the TV network employer should implement its forgiveness policy. Whatever you decide that might be for this Class 1 offense, implement that policy. It just needs to be consistent for everyone. Offense. An executive of a large company made a defamatory comment about a public official based upon a thoughtless and inaccurate understanding of the facts. Here's an executive of a large company. Well, then the company simply needs to implement its forgiveness policies. And you would have that in your forgiveness policies. 8 years ago, a famous artist crafted a painting unflattering to Asians. So the artist, who is his own employer, self-implemented adherence to standardized forgiveness policy. So this is how this particular guidance can be applied not just to companies, but to individuals. A group supporting violent protests demands a company fire a 20-year manager who characterized the protesters as animals in social media. So this person was reading the story on the social media, and these protesters, she didn't like what they were protesting and referred to them as animals. And so then these other people, these cancel culture people, read this and they said, and they wrote a letter to the company and said, you shouldn't have this person as an employee, you should fire them. Well, I think an option, now I understand that a lot of companies would go, sure, we'll fire them. No big deal. 20 years? Don't care. Don't care. Are they apologetic? Don't care. It's just so easy just to go ahead and fire them, and then we don't have to worry about it anymore. See, this is why having forgiveness policies, you don't have to do that anymore. You will have policies. You can just simply say we're aware of the situation and we have implemented our forgiveness policies. A dermatologist, what I'm about to say here is, and this isn't a real case, but it's similar to a few cases that have arisen in the past 5 or so years. A dermatologist with 9 years of postgraduate training, 9 years, okay, 4 years of college, 9 years of postgraduate training, 15 years in clinical practice, posted a single tweet in social media saying that any state that suppresses and kills others cannot stand. Unquote. She has relatives in Palestine. Well, I think if she's an employee of a hospital, there needs to be a conversation. What did she mean by that? And, how's that to be interpreted and such? The hospital could implement its forgiveness policies. The alternative is that the hospital could just simply fire her because some people believe a statement that says any state that suppresses and kills others cannot stand, that is anti-Semitic. You just say, well, we're interpreting that as anti-Semitism, so therefore this person should be canceled or fired. What about class 0? Speech of a nonviolent nature that some find disagreeable or offensive. Or, here's one, a person supports someone else or some other group who has made statements that some found disagreeable or offensive. I just think that's unbelievable. A person will have a friend, and this friend will have said something that is interpreted in a not so favorable way, and they will support this person, say, well, they're my friend, and I don't think they should be canceled, and then this person ends up getting canceled. I just think is that really what we need to focus upon as a society? People who are supporting others who are friends? I mean, I don't know. We're all entitled to our own opinion, I guess. We can agree to disagree, right? Or some people that are inarticulate or inappropriate in their analogies. It's like off the cuff, they make some analogy that in retrospect really didn't apply, but is offensive to some people. Here, what I think should happen is the company should encourage the individual to directly answer the questions that are posed to them, or preferentially be exposed to a forum attended by the people who are offended. So let's say you got a speaker whose viewpoints are not consistent with the opinions of some or many in the audience, like in a college. Well, I think a college is perfectly within its rights to say, okay, we're not going to yell and scream and shout you down during your presentation, but when your presentation's done, you got to answer some questions. I think that's perfectly appropriate and the exact right way to do things. There's an example of forgiveness culture. And there, it's not so much a case of forgiveness, it's a matter of respecting free speech, but the organizer of the presentation should encourage the speaker to take questions as part of the presentation. It can't be, you're going to give a speech where a lot of people disagree and then see ya. You just bolt out of the room. They pull the pin on the grenade and roll it into the room and leave. You got to own what you say. So I think that's a perfectly reasonable approach. But the thing to keep in mind, folks, is just because you would disagree with somebody's speech doesn't make it hate speech. That's not the definition of hate speech. Okay? And specifically with regard to college, there are a lot of advantages to taking that approach. Rather than cancel speakers for which you disagree, by inviting speakers with whom you disagree, that's going to better prepare students for when they leave college. So let's just take colleges and universities as an example again. Regarding controversial topics, which best prepares students after they leave? So which of these 3 choices? 1, only invite speakers having the viewpoints consistent with the mind hive of the faculty. So if a speaker doesn't have the same ideology as the faculty, they're not invited. They get canceled. Is that in the best interest of students? Only invite speakers provocative to minority students. Well, that doesn't make any sense either. You don't go to the other extreme. You don't want to only invite speakers who are provocative to minority students. That doesn't make any sense. How about welcome a spectrum of viewpoints, preferably speakers willing to answer questions from students when they get done with their presentation. And then again, while they're presenting, allow them speech. Allow them to present their points of view. Shouting people down, inviting them and then having students allowed to shout them down, that's not free speech. Okay? You can't hear what the person is talking about. That's not speech. Okay? And I can just only speak as an academician. There are all kinds of benefits of being challenged. Whenever I submit an article for publication, I get what's called peer review. And it gets reviewed by people that I don't know who they are. It's called blinded peer review. And inevitably, that'll make the article better because these people who are blinded will be critical of what it is that I wrote, and then I can fix them before it's published. So I welcome peer review. I mean, sometimes you don't like what they have to say, and sometimes they reject your paper. Nobody likes that. But in most cases, I think it will make an ultimate manuscript better because I will have heard criticisms from people who have different points of view. So that goes what I'm saying here in real world reviews are not always objective. They're not always nice. They're oftentimes not respectful. Sometimes they're not even informed. But irrespective of any of this, it will likely make the paper better. Because a Socratic method helps facilitate thought and challenge assumptions. And that's a good thing. It prompts revisitation of basic principles and beliefs. I can't tell you how many times where I just assumed that the reviewers would know what I'm talking about on the most basic levels, but they don't. And if the reviewers don't know what I'm talking about, many of the ultimate readers sure aren't going to know what I'm talking about. So it prompts revisitation of basic principles, which is a good thing. And finally, it better equips me and would better equip college students to respond to challenges after they leave college or after I publish a paper. So I think there's a lot of benefit from getting external points of view that don't necessarily agree with the mindset. Because who is better prepared for life in the workplace? Students who have limited access to viewpoints beyond the college faculty and who are protected from speech they disagree, like safe spaces and trigger warnings and all those types of things? Are students better off being exposed to multiple points of view, even points of view that include speech that offends them? A scientific author conducts an interview providing a perspective that differs from the leadership of the scientific journal. The journal should encourage the author to take questions in a scientific forum with publication of the proceedings. That, to me, would seem to be more productive than canceling the author. Or have the author required to resign, or having the author's editor resign. Academia has no less potential to better hone its message than anybody else. So hearing different points of view is an okay thing to do, even if the leadership of the scientific journal disagrees with it. A political pundit on a TV show claims that anyone who does not support his preferred candidate is a racist. Well, we've already talked about this. That gets to be very tiresome. In such a case, I think the TV network should encourage the political pundit to take questions in a public forum, organized and attended by those who do not support his candidate or by actual victims of racism. Get a hold of somebody that's actually been lynched and have them say, really? You're saying a candidate, anyone who does not support this candidate is a racist? Do you even know what racism means? Similarly, a member of a gun lobby claims anyone wanting to place limitations on any weapon is a snowflake. I think the gun lobbyists should take questions in a public forum, preferably from family members whose loved ones were killed by military-grade assault weapons. Take the questions, answer the questions, post it on YouTube. Social media records a small business owner characterizing those who advocate universal health care as mindless Marxist revolutionaries who hate America. This small business owner should agree to answer questions, preferably from family members whose lives were irreparably damaged by unexpected illnesses, right? People who were bankrupted because of unexpected illnesses. Answer those questions and see if at the end of the day this business owner really believes universal health care is Marxist and only promoted by those who hate America. An actor characterizes fiscal conservatives as Nazis and racists. I think the movie actor ought to take questions from fiscal conservatives and family members of Holocaust survivors and see if they're really the same. Okay? Now there may be some people who are exempted from forgiveness culture. Look, I want to think the best of everybody, and I want to be compassionate to everybody. But there's some individuals, I don't know. This is a failing on my part. This is a flaw in my personality. But there are some people that, I don't know, let hellfire rain. If they're going to, it would be those people, religious leaders, celebrities, politicians, corporate leaders, who have openly advocated against due process and openly advocated against the forgiveness of others. Have you been railing against other people and not willing to give other people the benefit of a doubt, not willing to give other people due process, not willing to even consider forgiving other people? Now you're found to have done something. It would be hard for me, it would be a failing on my part to have the compassion of saying, well, we're still going to engage in forgiveness culture even though you've had these positions. That would be really hard for me, okay? Maybe in these cases, such folks ought to be held to the same standards they demanded from others. And finally, a stand-up comic tells a joke. What do we do then, folks? What do we do then? What we can do while we're pondering that is we can consider how it is we're going to enter into the safe age. 2030. We're going to be, 2030, we're going to open up an entire new age. It isn't going to be the Bronze Age or the medieval age or the Dark Ages, or contemporary age or the modern age. It'll be the safe age. Standards and solutions, accountability, accuracy, freedom and forgiveness, evidence-based solutions, and empathy for others. So, yet again, this has been one of 3 YouTube videos describing the intersection between the science of stand-up and racism, free speech, cancel culture, and forgiveness, the social sciences. Please click on the subscribe button to add this channel to your subscriptions. Click on the notification button to be notified of new content. Click on the like button if you like this YouTube video. Click on the share button if you would like to forward this to others. And as with the other YouTube videos, here are some questions for which I would appreciate your comments in the comment section. When a person who does not share your politics makes a mistake and apologizes, is it your inclination to demand he or she be fired or be forgiven? They're on the other side of your ideology. Is forgiveness even an option? To what degree would society benefit if corporate and social leaders replaced cancel culture with solution age that included forgiveness culture? What if all corporations, entertainment industry, sports industry, big industry, what if they all had forgiveness policies and procedures? The FOVA guidelines that I talked about, the forgiveness of verified acts guidelines. Wonder if every company had that and posted it on their website. Wouldn't that be so much easier for everybody? Everybody would know where they stand, and then the companies wouldn't have to worry about it anymore. That's my thinking anyway. So thank you. Thank you for your attention to this YouTube video. I hope you'll stay tuned for future YouTube videos. And my name is Dr. Harold Bays, Medical Director of the Louisville Metabolic and Atherosclerosis Research Center located in Louisville, Kentucky. And you've been watching yet another YouTube video on the science of stand-up.